12 o'clock? Okay. Good afternoon, and welcome to yet another extremely topical and extremely timely AMET webinar. Several decades ago, former refusenik and head of the Jewish Agency, Natan Sharansky, wrote in Commentary magazine that, quote, American college campuses are bastions of anti-Semitism within North America, and that Jewish students have become, quote, the new Jews of silence. And the situation has markedly deteriorated since then. In a recent survey taken by the Alyza D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, 65% of Jewish students expressed a feeling of being unsafe on their college campuses. A national survey conducted by the ADL and Hillel International discovered that 1/3 of Jewish college students experienced anti-Semitic hate directed at them personally in the last year. 3/4 of the respondents in an AJC poll stated that reports about the Gaza attacks on Israel last year made them feel less safe as Jews in the United States. We are honored to have with us today Alyza Lewin from the Brandeis Center for Civil Rights Under Law. She'll walk us through what can be done, what should be done, and what already has been done to protect Jewish students from anti-Semitic attacks on college campuses. The mission of the Alyza D. Brandeis Center for Civil Rights Under Law is to advance the civil and human rights of the Jewish people and promote justice for all. Alyza is president of the Brandeis Center and also co-founder and partner of the Lewin & Lewin law firm. One of the many highlights of Alyza's illustrious career is that in 2014, she argued before the U.S. Supreme Court the case of Zivotofsky versus Kerry, arguing that babies born in Jerusalem have the right to have Israel placed on their passport, which paved the way for Trump's move to allow for this in October of 2020. Alyza, please tell us about some of your most recent challenges and some of your accomplishments during this past year.
Oh, Sarah, well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be on this webinar program with you today. It really is always such a pleasure to not only talk with you, but to work with you on these efforts. The work that you do is so extremely important and valuable, and it's really a pleasure to be able to join with you. So when you talk about the situation on campuses today, we still have on campus what people would refer to as the traditional age-old forms of anti-Semitism, the old anti-Semitic tropes alleging, Jewish power and conspiracy. But there's a newer form of anti-Semitism that's really taken root that in many ways is much more sinister. And that's, I think, what the students, when you talk about these surveys at the Brandeis Center and others, are really feeling. It's an anti-Semitism that is targeting Jews on the basis of our shared ancestry and ethnicity, our sense of Jewish peoplehood, and our deep historical connection to the land of Israel. And so today what we see on campuses is that any student who expresses support for the existence of Israel as the Jewish homeland is marginalized, ostracized, shunned, and actually in many cases excluded from certain areas of campus life. So years ago, right, you could already see this starting to happen. You may recall there was a few years ago at NYU, there was a BDS resolution. So we talk often about these BDS resolutions and the push to boycott Israel, but what started to happen and what you saw explicitly at NYU was that the BDS resolution wasn't just about boycotting Israeli products or even about boycotting Israeli academics. The BDS resolution at NYU included a provision that said, we're going to boycott the pro-Israel students on our campus. We're not going to co-sponsor events with them. We won't engage with them. And what many people don't know is that what happened after that resolution is that the university turned around and realized that was a problem. And so it brought in and hired a professional facilitator to try and facilitate a dialogue among these students. There were 53 student organizations that signed on to that BDS resolution. This was the entire progressive community on campus. represented in these organizations. And so they brought together the representatives from these organizations with this professional facilitator, and the facilitator explained, we're here to engage in a dialogue. This is not a debate. A debate would be where I try and convince you I'm right, you're wrong. That's not what we're here for. We're here to just listen, for everyone to share their perspective so we can hear where people are coming from. And we recognize that we won't all agree, but we'll listen respectfully. What was supposed to be a 1.5 hour dialogue turned into a 2.5 hour discussion about whether the anti-Zionists would even deign to dialogue with the Zionists. They said, we've come to this meeting because we don't want to risk losing our student funding, but we're not going to talk to them. And after 2.5 hours, the facilitator gave up. And the university made an announcement, we're not going to divest from businesses that do business with Israel, from companies that do business with Israel. But that did nothing to address the interpersonal problems that were happening on the campus, where the students were refusing to talk to and engage with one another. And we're seeing more and more of that on campus today.
Right.
Share with you more examples.
That brings us to what happened this past November at Duke, when the student government denied one group and one group alone, students supporting Israel, from recognition. Part of that denial was because of a tweet by one member of Students Supporting Israel saying how we would like to educate our fellow students about words like colonialism and what they actually mean. How is this acceptable according to our Constitution that this student's freedom of speech has been denied?
You're right. The situation with Students Supporting Israel at Duke is unacceptable for several reasons. And the Brandeis Center has been very active in trying to push the university to correct that wrong. I hope they do. So as you described, what happened was Students Supporting Israel, there were two students who applied to create a new recognized student organization. They satisfied all the requirements. They went through, the last step is to get the approval of the student government. They got that approval, and the university newspaper published an article saying that they had been approved, a new student organization. And there was a student who then tweeted a link to that newspaper article saying that my university is now supporting settler colonialism. And so what the SSI students did is they screenshot that and posted it on their Instagram account with this response to this student saying, come, right? Come, this is why we need, and this is why we have our programs to explain to you why settler colonialism doesn't apply to Israel at all. Now, this should be exactly the kind of speech that universities should be encouraging, exactly this kind of dialogue and communication. Let us explain to you, come, let's meet, let's talk. Instead, what happened is the newspaper took that Instagram post, blew it up, it exploded, and the president of the student government then used her veto power to then 5 days after the approval, veto the recognition of SSI as a student organization. The veto power had never, ever, presidential veto power had never been used at Duke before to unrecognize, derecognize or revoke the recognition of a student organization. That was a first. In fact, it's the first time, I think, since 2018 that the presidential veto power has been used at all. In the past, it had to do with funding. And then worse, what happened is it was followed by a hearing of the entire student government that became a witch trial of sorts, because the issue was whether or not the student government would override the president's veto. And instead, the students were questioned, interrogated about their connection with Israel, their reasonings for creating the organization, and singled out. And the vote at the end, the only votes to override the veto were the 3 Jewish senators on the Senate. Overwhelmingly, it was over 30 people who voted to uphold the veto. And so, as of this moment, the SSI group does not have recognized status. This is very reminiscent of a situation that happened a few years ago at Williams College, where a group of students also sought to create a pro-Israel group, and the student government at Williams, which had quite a few anti-Zionists on the student government at that point, rejected it, just out of hand, rejected it. And there was an uproar. And so the president of the university said to the the students who wanted to create the pro-Israel group, don't worry, even if you're not recognized, you have almost the same access. There's really not that much difference. And that created a major public outcry, right? That's similar to saying, it's okay if we require you to sit at the back of the bus because the bus will get you where you need to go anyway, right? So what happened at that point is there was pressure put on the university president, and there was a law professor at George Mason who actually filed a formal complaint with the Office for Civil Rights in the Department of Education. And ultimately, the university realized that they had no choice, and the president of the university ended up recognizing, this is at Williams College, recognizing that pro-Israel group as a recognized student organization, giving it full equal rights. And OCR subsequently entered into a resolution agreement with the university saying, great, and now we're going to monitor you for the first year to make sure that this student group really does get complete, full, and equal rights. And so that's what we're asking Duke University to do. So far, Duke University has only told the students that they have identified options for them to get some support. That's not adequate. That's not adequate.
Right.
And as I say, in terms of the law, there are two legal problems here. One is the discriminatory treatment. They were treated differently based on their, as we say, shared ancestral and ethnic identity. This was their unabashedly, unapologetic pro-Israel group, and this is why they were singled out and treated differently. But in addition, it's a real speech issue, as you put it. And the people should know, and we included this in our letter to Duke, that just like universities are at risk of losing their government funding if they discriminate against a group on the basis of race, color, national, ethnic origin, they are also at risk of losing their federal funding if they don't live up to the guarantees to protect free expression that they have made to their students. So with a private university, usually what you'll have is there'll be policies that they issue on free expression. There'll be statements made by the presidents or the trustees about how they protect the students' free expression. That's treated as a contractual obligation under the law. And if you fail to protect the students' speech rights to the extent that you've promised, then you could, according to a regulation that's called the Religious Liberty and Free Inquiry Reg, you could be at risk as a university of losing your ability to apply and receive federal grants. So
that has not yet happened to any Jewish students because of any, no.
Not yet.
And that is why for so many years, Ahmed has been working to have Jews recognized as protected minorities under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. But unfortunately, it has not yet happened. It has not come about under either Republican or Democratic administration. Would you like to weigh in a bit about that?
Jews are recognized as a protected category, and it has, right? The executive order that was signed in 2019 actually formalized what had already been understood, right, as what we would call sub-regulatory guidance. So nobody has changed. Since 2010,
right,
there's already been bipartisan agreement that members of faith-based groups, that would include Jews and Muslims and Sikhs, right? Members of faith-based groups who are harassed or discriminated against on the basis of their actual or perceived shared ancestry or ethnic characteristics, those groups maintain that protection. They would still receive protection under Title VI for that kind of discrimination. So in other words, that's what Ken Marcus initially in 2004 wrote in his Dear Colleague letter, that when he started to see members of faith-based groups like Sikhs after 9/11 who were experiencing terrible bullying, they were being mistaken for Muslims and were being harassed and discriminated against. And the question was, do they get Title VI protection for this? And he answered, of course they do, because you are protected on the basis of national ethnic origin discrimination, even if you also are part of a group that shares a common faith. You don't lose that protection. So that was in 2004 in the Bush administration, was Ken's letter. In 2010, in the Obama administration, the Department of Justice adopted that understanding and issued its own Dear Colleague letter, which was followed by another extensive letter from the Department of Education. So as I say, by 2010, you had both the Obama administration and the Bush administration recognizing that members of faith-based groups, so that includes Jews, Sikhs, Muslims, are protected by Title VI. And then what the executive order did in 2019 is it raised that to the level of an executive order. It expanded it so that it now applies to all government agencies that are covered by Title VI, not just Department of Education or Department of Justice, but any government agency that gives out funding and is covered by Title VI, they also are covered by the executive order. And then the final thing that it did is it linked Title VI with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. So it said, here we're telling you that Jews are covered from discrimination when it's on the basis of their national or ethnic origin, right? Their shared ancestral ethnic heritage. Sometimes people don't know exactly what that means. What does that look like? What is discrimination on the basis of a Jew's national ethnic origin? Well, the definition of anti-Semitism that was adopted by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance can provide that guidance. So when you're trying to do an investigation and understand what is anti-Semitism, look to the IRA definition to understand that. That's what the executive order did in 2019. So now that is the framework under which these actions of discrimination are reviewed. And so that's what the Brandeis Center does, right? The Brandeis Center says, okay, that's our structure, that's our framework. Now we're going to take these episodes, like what happened at Duke, or like what happens, we have at other universities. We dealt with Rose Rich at the University of Southern California when she was targeted and harassed, and an impeachment proceeding was started against her. She had been the student government vice president. And they decided that because she was a Zionist, that means she's a racist. And therefore, they tried to push her out on that basis. That's a violation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, right? And we articulated that for the university in a letter, and the university actually very quietly made that impeachment proceeding go away. That's what we articulated in our complaint for the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which is what led to a really groundbreaking joint statement by the University of Illinois, where they talked about and recognized that Zionism is an integral part of the identity and the ethnic and ancestral heritage of many of the students on their campus, right? This is what we need universities to start to understand, and the general public to understand.
Right. And as we know, the Biden administration never ripped up the executive order. But so much, I think, depends on a willingness to actually implement it. Last May, we sent a letter signed by approximately 20 members of Congress to Education Secretary Miguel Cardona, delineating certain acts of anti-Semitism on American college campuses, including one extremely, there are so many, but one that we spoke about then was when a teaching assistant, Rashaya Anaya from Johns Hopkins University, tweeted the following tweet: ethical dilemma. If you have to grade a Zionist student's exam, do you still give them all their points even though they support your ethnic cleansing? Like, I don't know. And she had a poll, and 18 students replied, and 77% felt that she should fail the Zionist students. Now, Johns Hopkins said that there was an internal investigation after many complaints from organizations such as my own, but the results have never been disclosed, and she is still teaching. And we know out of the 444 members of the Middle East Studies Association present, at the last meeting, they have voted, 93% voted to put forth a BDS resolution from the Middle Eastern Studies Association. So when you have your professors who are so deeply imbued with anti-Semitism, what kind of recourse do students have?
So I want to add, though, something to when you talk about the Johns Hopkins TA, because it's a point that I have heard the story, and we at the Brandeis Center also have written to Johns Hopkins about it, and it's not emphasized, I feel, or articulated enough. It's not just that she as a TA has this own personal perspective of hers. What was so appalling and particularly outrageous about her tweet was that she framed it as a poll. It wasn't that she just said, oh, I don't like Zionists. It's that she basically said to her community and her followers, what do you think? Should we treat these Zionists in a discriminatory fashion? Should I fail them? She riled up her followers to turn against the Zionists. That's when you say, 80 some odd % of the respondents say, yeah, fail them. What is that all about? No teacher, no professor, no staff member, no student should be permitted to turn around and rile up one part of the student body to turn against the other part of the student body. And what's so problematic about the university's response is the university has to understand that for each of these incidents, there are two buckets, if you want to say, in which the university has to treat it and respond. One is they need to do an investigation to determine whether or not that conduct violated their university's code of conduct. They need to determine whether or not that was an action that deserved some kind of sanction. And if it did, then they need to sanction the individual who's responsible for the conduct that violated their rules. I can understand and appreciate that there are privacy concerns there, and that maybe they might not be able, because of privacy rules, to share what steps they took in terms of that investigation and determination. But that's completely and totally separate than the other bucket, which is they have and that very publicly called on the part of her community to turn on students at the university. That's a very public step. I don't know if you've frozen on me. I hope I didn't freeze. But
you froze for a minute. It's freezing. Alyza, if you can hear me, you've frozen. Let's see if we could just be patient for a minute. Let's hope that you unfreeze. Sorry. I apologize. While we're waiting, I would like to just express a little bit about some of the recent things that have happened. Just this month, Brown University hired as a director of the university's Center for Middle Eastern Studies, Bershit Dumani, who is from Berzit University from the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, if you will. And he's also the founder of its New Directions and Palestinian Studies Research Initiative. Berzit University is the home of a great deal of anti-Israeli agitation. The students from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and Hamas held several military parades earlier this month. Columbia University has at least 4 departments within it, which are wholly occupied by professors who are virulently Israel bashers. Columbia's Center for Palestine Studies, the Middle East Institute, the Center for Islamic Studies, and the Middle East, South Asian, and African student programs. San Francisco State University has hosted known terrorist Layla Khalid for a virtual lecture to university students. Layla Khalid, as you know, many of you know, has hijacked 2 planes, one in 1969 and one in 1970, with members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. And earlier this month, on December 13th, Rutgers University hosted Nora Arakat, who calls herself a human rights lawyer, but is deeply, deeply steeped in anti-Semitism and describes Zionism as a racist supremacist ideology. So our young students, who are the purveyors of and the thought leaders of the next generation, are subjected to this. So I'm very, very worried about our next generation. But this has been going on for some time, since 1974, when Edward Said wrote his book, Orientalism. Now, I'm hoping our real expert for today, Alyza Lewin, could get back on. Maybe she has to reboot and get back on. But in the meantime, let's, and I can talk a little bit more about Duke University, which is really a problem. In 2019, Duke University and the University of North Carolina had a consortium on their Middle East studies, talking about the then recent war in Gaza, where a Palestinian rapper, Tamer Nafar, sang a brazenly anti-Semitic song and introduced the song with the sentence, quote, "Let's try it together. I need your help. I cannot be anti-Semitic alone here." This was brought to us at taxpayers' expense through another Title VI of the Higher Education Act. And there's a lot of intersectionality between that and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And when Ken Marcus, who's now founder and chairman of the board of directors of the Brandeis Center for Civil Rights under the law, when he was the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Education for Civil Rights for the Department of Education, a letter was sent on an investigation was opened up. The letter was actually not sent by Ken, but by, I think his name was Robert King, opening up an investigation, because these are taxpayers' dollars that are supposed to be brought to raise a generation of experts and scholars in the Middle East. But many times paltry propaganda is a substitute for these sorts of programs. Unfortunately, the investigation was opened up. Duke sent a lovely letter, and the investigation was closed. In 2008, AMET, the organization that I founded, was responsible for working with Congress and putting several amendments into Title VI of the Higher Education Act, one calling for diversity of perspectives and a wide range of viewpoints, but unfortunately that's
never happened to me before.
So I was talking about
technology.
I'm so sorry, Alyza. We are all just, unfortunately, victims of our technology that we've created for our ease, and very much at their mercy. So, Alyza, if you can continue, you're the expert here.
I was on this roll, this passionate roll.
Okay.
But the Johns Hopkins TA, right? What I was explaining is that there were two buckets, is what I said, for how the university needs to respond. One is in terms of doing investigation to decide whether there were rules that were violated and should be sanctioned, and that could be covered by the privacy rules. But there are no privacy rules that would prevent the university from recognizing and talking about how unacceptable it is to have a member of their university community rile up one part of the community to turn against the others, right? They have to. This was a very public statement. It was a very public effort that impacted the climate on campus. They must address that impact that it had in a very public way. So they must call out and say this kind of conduct, right, from a professor, from a teacher, from a TA is unacceptable. We cannot tolerate having anyone try and encourage or incite hostility towards a part of our community. And that's what you've done here. And that we will not tolerate, because it runs counter to everything our university stands for in terms of our values of mutual respect and inclusion and diversity. And right, that's what they have to say. And that's the piece that's really been missing in Johns Hopkins. And it hasn't been articulated loudly or forcefully enough.
Right. Speaking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, could you address the absence of Jewish identity from these diversity, equity, and inclusion programs?
Yes, that's a real problem that we've seen, and we've seen it now happening with increasing frequency on campuses as these DEI programs become all the rage. So what's happening, unfortunately, in many situations is that programs that are intended and have the most laudable, I will say, intent, right? They want to teach and make people sensitive to bias and to discrimination and to try and eradicate racism and discrimination. But what they're actually doing is inadvertently, in many cases, fostering a hatred of Jews. And I'll explain to you how and why that happens. It happens because these programs very often do not include a place for Jewish identity. Jewish identity is basically absent. So Jews are not recognized, as we talk about, as a people, right? Jews are seen as just a religion. And in fact, on campuses, many administrations misunderstand and think that if there's some issue with the Jews, it should be handled by the Dean of Religious Affairs. The problem is that overwhelmingly today, now the pressure and the shunning that the Jewish students are feeling isn't based on their religious practice. Yes, there may be some times where we need better accommodations for Yom Kippur and things, but overwhelmingly, the marginalization that they're feeling is based on the pride they're taking in their ethnic heritage, right? In their sense of Jewish peoplehood and our connection to the Jewish homeland, to the land of Israel. And so understanding the Jews as a people and the richness of our culture and our heritage, and how the Jews as a people have historically also experienced discrimination and marginalization, and worse, violence and genocide, right? But that's all ignored. That doesn't exist in the DEI program as part of the discussion. Jews are not viewed as one of the disadvantaged communities that DEI focuses on. But it gets worse because the only mention then of Jews in the program is all Jews, doesn't matter where they come from, but all Jews are lumped and categorized and treated as white. And so the Jews then become the white oppressors, and Jews are described as powerful and rich and controlling. That's the image that's provided in these DEI programs, which is synonymous with the anti-Semitic stereotypes. It's a caricature, an anti-Semitic caricature of what a Jew is. I had one retired professor who called me very troubled. He was had been, before he retired, also a Reform rabbi. And he told me a story about how he had taught for years at a university where there were no Jews, no Jewish students. But he'd been asked to come teach a class on anti-Semitism after there had been an episode at the school where the former president, who was no longer there, had really been anti-Semitic and had made some very nasty comments about the one Jewish professor that had been on this campus, not this professor, but the one Jewish, and had made some very real anti-Semitic comments, and there had been a lawsuit. And part of the outgrowth of that lawsuit was that the university agreed they would create a course on anti-Semitism. So they reached out to the local Reform rabbi to ask if he would teach this class. And he had agreed and taught it for years. And he said, because there were no Jews on this campus, I decided as part of my anti-Semitism class to teach about what Judaism is, so that these students would get a little bit of a feel for who are the Jewish people and what is Judaism about, and then understand the hostility and the hatred of Jews and anti-Semitism. And then he said, I retired and a non-Jew took over teaching my class. And he said, now I'm very troubled because a new president started this year at the university. And the person who's been teaching this class is retiring at the end of this year. So I don't think the class will be taught anymore. But this new president has now required that all students, in order to graduate, must take a diversity, equity, and inclusion course. And I know the faculty member who's going to be teaching this class. And I can tell you that the only way Jews are going to be described in this class is as white, powerful oppressors, colonialists. And now all the students are going to have to take this course. And they're not going to meet any other Jews on campus. So how then at the end of the day, can anyone be surprised when all the students who graduate from this university will graduate with a very negative impression of what it means to be a Jew and what the Jewish people are or what they're all about? That's what's so frightening about these DEI programs. And that's what we saw at Stanford, which is why the Brandeis Center filed its EEOC complaint at Stanford, because there we were talking about a DEI program that was run and developed for the clinicians, for those who provided mental health support to the students at Stanford. And this DEI program systematically, not only did it started by creating race-based affinity groups and putting all the Jewish staff into the white affinity group. So as one of our clients said, she came from a family of Holocaust survivors. The notion that she has any affinity with the people that, murdered Jews and targeted her family members is triggering to begin with. But then it got worse because the group systematically ignored the anti-Semitism that was taking place at Stanford. So for example, there had been a university-wide event held on Zoom early on in COVID era, and it was Zoom bombed. And the Zoom bombing included images of swastikas, as well as images of anti-Black racism and use of the N-word. And at the session, when the group got together, when the clinicians got together to talk about it, they only focused on the anti-Black racist imagery and from the Zoom bombing. And when the Jewish members tried to raise the issue of the swastikas and the anti-Semitism, they were shut down. And they were told, no, the Jews are powerful. The Jews, don't need the support, right? You can't. If you talk about the anti-Semitism, you're removing the focus from where it needs to be. And this happened again later on in the year when there were swastikas found elsewhere on campus. Never got to it, never talked about it. You have to think, if this is a program that's supposed to try and sensitize the therapists who are going to be providing the mental health support to students at Stanford who need it, what happens when there's a Jewish student who's experienced anti-Semitism and needs the mental health support to deal with that? What are the therapists going to say? Well, we know because there was one student who said that they went and that they were basically told to check their privilege, right? These Jewish students are not going to be able to receive the quality mental health support that they need if the clinicians themselves are being trained to ignore or dismiss anti-Semitism. That's the problem.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit, and then we'll go turn this over to my wonderful colleague, Hussein Abubakar Mansour. I see that my screen is lit up with questions, but I would just, can you talk a little bit about what happened at Tufts recently?
So at Tufts, I should share with you, at Tufts, we represented a student by the name of Max Price. And it's important, actually, we talk about this because what happened at Tufts is that Students for Justice in Palestine initiated what they call the Deadly Exchange campaign, and they wanted a referendum, a vote of the entire university campus on this Deadly Exchange matter. Deadly Exchange is a campaign that seeks to claim that Israel and the Jews, right, the Jewish homeland, is responsible for police brutality in the United States. And so what they wanted was they wanted assurances from the university that they would never send any of the campus security folks on any of these trips to Israel that sometimes law enforcement groups had taken to Israel. They were almost a form of birthright for law enforcement, where they would go travel around the country, see the country, meet with both Israeli and Palestinian police officers, but they wanted an assurance. There had been in the past, apparently, one of the security officers who had gone, who no longer worked at Tufts, but they wanted to make sure that the university would never, ever hire anybody who'd ever been on one of these trips and would never permit anybody to ever go on one of these trips again in the future. But they, in the referendum, called these trips military training trips, which they were not. Max Price was a member of the Student Judiciary Committee, which was tasked with reviewing the referendum language and making sure it was accurate. And he raised some questions about the language, such as this use of calling it a military training. He brought in the itinerary, explained what happened, why it's not a military training trip. And the SJP folks were very obviously upset about that. And so they targeted Max and tried to get him not only removed or at least silenced on the Judiciary Committee, but also ultimately removed from the Judiciary Committee because they said that he was, because he had also been president of the Tufts Friends of Israel group, that he was inherently biased. But going back to where we started with the NYU, this was an example how they used this deadly exchange campaign. It really was not about increased security for students on Tufts campus. It was all about marginalizing and isolating the pro-Israel Jewish students. And how did they do that? Well, there were over 40 student groups, again, the entire progressive community on Tufts campus, that signed on to support this deadly exchange referendum. But Students for Justice in Palestine put together a booklet about the deadly exchange campaign. This is what their booklet looked like. In their booklet, they included this map. There we go, upside down, there we go, here we go. This map, if you look at it, is very interesting because it doesn't refer to the area that Israel obtained control over in 1967 as occupied territory. It refers to all of Israel as occupied territory. And it refers to everything as Palestine. Now, what does this map have to do with police brutality in America? What does this map have to do with the safety and security of students at Tufts? Nothing, nothing. The reason this map is there is because what this group was doing is it was demanding that if you wanted to be part of the progressive community on campus, if you wanted to be able to demonstrate with all these other groups on the, which stand for the issues of, racial equality and the LGBT community, women's rights, immigration rights, climate change, any of these issues, because those were all the groups that were signed on to this, the first thing you have to do is accept this map. You cannot be a part of the progressive community on campus unless you can accept this map. Where does that leave Jewish students? Even Jewish students who may be critical of some of the policies of the current government of Israel, can they accept this map? They can't accept this map. So what it's doing is it's forcing those students to either have to shed their sense of Jewish peoplehood and any kind of connection to the land of Israel in order to be able to participate and feel accepted as part of the progressive community on campus. What happened with Max was that they kept pressuring the Judiciary Committee, saying he should have no right. He can't speak up at these meetings. He's inherently biased. And they ultimately managed to get the chair of the Judiciary Committee to actually silence Max Price, because at the final meeting where they were considering the language of the resolution, the chair of the Judiciary Committee told Max, you have to stay on mute. If you come off mute, it was a Zoom meeting, I will unmute you. And Students for Justice in Palestine came to that meeting and brought to that meeting a person who was going to explain why this is not an anti-Semitic problematic resolution. And Max was the only person who would have been able to respond to that, and he was silenced. And at the end of that session is when the committee members voted and allowed the resolution language. And the referendum was put up for a vote and passed. The student body passed it. And yet that wasn't enough for SJP, because SJP then filed a formal complaint for us that then resulted in the setting of a student government disciplinary hearing against Max Price, where they were seeking to have Max removed from the Judiciary Committee because he refused to recuse himself and remove himself from the discussions of this campaign. We wrote a couple of letters to the university urging them to take action. And the day before this hearing was set, Students for Justice in Palestine withdrew their complaint. We don't know what went on behind the scenes, but they withdrew their complaint and the hearing was halted. And Max was able to continue for the rest of the year on the Judiciary Committee. He's an extraordinary young man who really has stood up to so much. But that's the story at Tufts.
That is one success story out of many. I mean, the truth is there have got to be thousands of Alyza Lewins right now because of the number of complaints that I just hear, just randomly about. I mean, this is just widespread throughout the country. I know that we've had so many questions come in. So it's now my honor to turn the podium over to Hussein Abubakar Mansour, our wonderful director of our program for emerging democracies out of the Middle East, who will read some of the questions that have come in. Hussein?
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you very much, Alyza, for such a wonderful and insightful presentation with so much information about the work you do about such a very disturbing issue and very concerning issue. We've received a lot of questions, as you may imagine, from our audience. Obviously, the issue of campuses is right now a major concern for the Jewish community, I would say for the entire country. I will try to get to all of the questions. I'm not sure that we have all the time to get through them, so I'm going to try to combine as many questions as possible together. One of the very first questions that we received, it seems that the issues with anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on U.S. campuses have quite exploded in recent times. Have the Jewish community failed to deal with these problems? Does this mean that American Jews are not doing enough to face the threats on university campuses, college campuses?
So I don't think it's that we're not doing enough. I think that a big part of the problem has been getting, on university campuses, it's getting administrators to understand, but even in terms of the general public, getting people to appreciate that what they are seeing and what they are witnessing is actually harassment and discrimination of Jews. I think administrators, and that's what I realized when I first came on board 3 years ago at the Brandeis Center as the president of the Brandeis Center, I realized that university administrators thought that what they were witnessing was a political debate. They thought that on the one hand, they had the pro-Palestinian community, on the other hand, they had the pro-Israeli community, and they were just debating. And the university's feeling is, this is free speech, right? This is not for me to get involved. There's no law that requires me to get involved, the administrators figured. And in fact, they think that there's a law that prevents them from getting involved because they can't shut down anybody's speech. What they don't realize, and what they are now, when we get involved, slowly starting to understand that that's not what's taking place on campus. What's taking place on campus is this move to delegitimize and shun and exclude these students. And if you think about anti-Semitism historically, that's what anti-Semitism has always sought to do, right? Think about the yellow Star of David that the Jews had to wear. The idea of that yellow star was to deny those Jews their place in society, right? You don't go shop in their stores. You don't use them as your lawyers or your doctors, right? You shun them. They're beyond the pale. Individual Jews have always historically, anti-Semitism, what it's done is it's blamed the Jew for that society's misfortune. If you think about what is viewed today by society as our greatest misfortune, it's the issues of racism, apartheid, settler colonialism. So not only are we blaming Jews as whites for that, but if you understand also that the idea is to deny the Jew his place in society, what's also happening today is, isn't it interesting that the one country in the world that's viewed as the worst offender of the greatest ills that society has today, right? Which country is blamed as being the worst when it comes to apartheid, racism, settler colonialism? It's the Jewish homeland. It's the Jewish state of Israel. not places like China with the Uyghurs or Iran or North Korea or any of these countries. No, it's the Jewish homeland. Why? Because they're seeking to deny the Jewish homeland its place in the society of nations. That's the way Erwin Cutler has described it. It's that same attempt to shun and to marginalize the Jews. That's today's anti-Semitism. And trying to get the world to see that and understand that, that's our greatest challenge. That's what we have to learn how to do. When a group like Sunrise DC turns around and says, we're not going to speak at a rally on voting rights because these Jewish pro-Israel groups that agree with us on voting rights are part of this coalition, that's when the world has to understand what is going on here. What's going on here is not a political debate about voting rights. It's an attempt to marginalize and exclude and shun and delegitimize the Jew. Which Jew? The Jew who has pride in our Jewish ethnic heritage. The Jew which believes that I am part of the Jewish people. The Jew who believes that the Jewish people started in the land of Israel, that our history is deeply connected to that place, and that what has happened is not that the Jews are settler colonialists, but rather that when the Jews created the state of Israel, it was a return to our ancestral homeland and an exercise of our right to once again establish our right to self-determination in the ancient Jewish homeland of the Jewish people. Jews are indigenous to Judea, and that's what we need to teach the world.
Thank you. We've received a lot of questions about the settings of this form of anti-Semitism, so I'm going to try to combine them in kind of a big, large question. Basically, that most of these examples show that the concentration of this anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is mainly in large universities and in liberal arts college. So we have a number of questions. What are the state of affairs in other types of post-secondary educational institutions, community colleges, conservatories, et cetera, et cetera? Is this happening only in undergrad for undergrad students, or do graduate students have the same issues? So that's basically the questions about the kind of settings.
So I think that this trend that we see starts on universities and then spreads, it grows. You know, the danger of the anti-Semitism that we're seeing is it's not limited, as I just said when I used the Sunrise DC example, it's not limited to any one type of university. It's not limited to just universities. It is, some people have named it now and called it erasive anti-Semitism. That's a term that's been coined. And I think it's important for us to understand what's happening, because our enemies have realized that you don't need to kill the Jews to destroy the Jews, right? We don't need a genocide. Some people will say, oh, right, the Nazis, right, the white supremacists, they're the real violent ones. They're the real threat. Sure, they're a threat, and their anti-Semitism is dangerous. But erasive anti-Semitism is also dangerous. Why? Because you can destroy the Jewish people by erasing our identity as Jewish people. And how do you do that? Right? First, what you do is when you're talking, as we talked about, and you're creating these DEI programs that are trying to get the world to understand groups and communities that have historically experienced discrimination and marginalization, you leave out the Jew. There's no place for Jewish identity. It's erased, it's ignored. Then you deny our Jewish history. So you look at things like the United Nations or the Palestinian Authority, right, which regularly is denying that the Jews even have a history in their ancestral homeland. Why are they doing that? Why is the UN only referring to the Temple Mount by the Arabic name and not the Jewish name, right? If you deny that the Jews have a 3,000-year-old history, then you can call the Jews colonialists. But if the Jews were indigenous to Judea, they're not colonialists. Right, so you do it by ignoring Jewish identity, by erasing our Jewish history, and then finally, by if you still have people who have the audacity to say, no, I'm proud of my Jewish ancestral ethnic heritage. I'm proud of being part of the Jewish people, and I believe that my history is here. We shame you. We marginalize you. We shun you. We put such pressure on you to the point that you can't express that part of your Jewish identity, because if you do, you will be excluded. You will be discriminated against. That's how you get rid of the Jewish people.
Thank you. We've received a number of questions asking about the identity of most of the sources of this anti-Semitism on campus. Basically, is there a specific minority groups from which such anti-Semitism comes?
So there are some groups that are truly the enemies of the Jews, but then there are a lot of groups that are not, but they really want to do good in this world, and they want to help those who are hurting, right? They want to help, and that desire is sincere, that desire is genuine, and they get caught up with the rhetoric, right? It seems so clear because it's presented as if it's black and white. It's presented, right? What happened in May when you had the hostilities with Gaza, where overwhelmingly you had these statements that were coming out that were ignoring the fact that Hamas, a terrorist organization, is raining 4,000 rockets down on the citizens of Israel who are being forced to run and spend their times in bomb shelters. There's no mention of that. No mention of that. And yet, if somebody tries to mention it, they're told, no, there's no two sides to this story. If you try and suggest there are two sides to the story, you are a racist, right? So the problem is that there are folks who stand up and make these accusations against the Jews, against the Jewish people, against the Jewish homeland. Many of them, not because they are anti-Jewish, but because they have believed the rhetoric without understanding the truth. And that's part of the problem. So the challenge is to really be able to target and recognize who our real enemies are, and try and educate those who are holding their hands to understand that they're holding hands with people who don't have the same goal they do, right? So many people, for instance, who may say, I oppose the occupation. They may say, right, I don't like Israel's current policies. Many people, I believe, say that because their ultimate goal is coexistence. They want Jews and Arabs to be able to coexist side by side in peace. But they're holding hands with people who don't share that same goal, who are not seeking coexistence. They're seeking the destruction of the one and only Jewish state. They are not the friends of the Jewish people. They're the enemies of the Jewish people. And we need to be able to try and educate those two different groups, right? One, we're never going to educate, but we need to educate those who can be educated so they don't hold hands with those who really are the enemies of the Jews.
Thank you. I'll combine two questions for the last question, and I want to apologize for all our audiences that were not able to get to their questions. Given that this is a current situation on campuses, basically college campuses in the US are now battlegrounds. Does this mean that the Jewish community have to go to high school and start educating high school students before they arrive to campuses or as a preemptive strike against this level of anti-Semitism? And then the second question would be basically Jewish students. Now, parents of Jewish students might be reluctant or afraid in sending their children to such hostile environment, because if I may add, they're either going to have very unpleasant time, they're going to face a lot of hostility, or they will actually lose them as their Jewish identity dissolves as a way of protecting themselves. What can Jewish families do in order to make sure that their children are stronger in order to face such an environment?
I'm so glad you asked that, because it's absolutely true. You can't expect Jewish students to fight this battle, which is very unfair, first of all, for them to even be put in this position. But you can't expect them to do that if their sole Jewish identity is all about fighting anti-Semitism. There has to be instilled in our young people today a sense of Jewish identity that's worth fighting for, right? So the most important thing that any parent can do is to, first of all, themselves learn about our Jewish identity and try and share and convey that to your children, right? I would suggest, if you haven't, like, read the Bible. And if you want an easy way to read the Bible, read anything that Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory has written. If you really want to know, I would suggest he has online Covenant and Conversation with Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. Each week, there's a nice short little essay about the portion that's being read of the Torah, of the Bible, that week in the synagogue. And you will see and you will understand that all these principles of social justice that the world is talking about today, where'd they start? They began with the Jews, right? The Jews were the ones who introduced to society the whole idea that human beings are created in God's image, which is where the idea of equality comes from, right? That we should all be treated equal and with respect comes from our Jewish sources, our Judaism. That's where it starts. You know, not too long ago, we read the story in the Bible about Joseph forgiving his brothers when they come down to Egypt. That's the first time in history, recorded history, of an episode of forgiveness, right? The Jewish people introduced to the world this concept of forgiveness, the idea that people can actually repent and make change and be good and be accepted and forgiven. That's a Jewish concept, right? These are the kinds of ideas and notions that we need to be talking about. We need to be teaching our children. And I also have to say that it's really important, really, really important for us to start speaking more about and understanding the idea of Jewish peoplehood and the need for Jewish unity. We need to, as the Jewish people, recognize that it doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter what's your background. It doesn't matter if you're Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Haredi, Chiloni, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi, a Jew of color. Whatever your background, we are all part of the Jewish people, and we must unite together and celebrate our Jewish peoplehood and celebrate and be proud of our history and our heritage. There are real enemies, and we need to join together to confront those enemies, because when we're united, we can overcome anything. It's when we're divided that we become weak, and our enemies know that. And they love nothing more than to see us divided. And we are unfortunately spending way too much time already as the Jewish people now bickering among ourselves, from everything from what the definition of apartheid is to, quite frankly, today, you know, this morning in the news about whether or not additional rabbis should be able to oversee Jewish conversions, right? We need to unite as a people. We need to celebrate and recognize the humanity in all of us as the Jewish people. We need to recognize that even though we may observe differently, we are all part of one people. And when we are targeted as a people, we have to stand together and push back against it. The most important lesson to know and to understand is that the best response to harassment and discrimination is self-confidence and pride. And we have to teach that to our children, and we have to show that and teach that by example. We need to stand up as proud Jews, as proud people, and as proud supporters and lovers of our Jewish homeland, the land of Israel.
Thank you so much, Alyza, for your very inspiring and characteristically eloquent and brilliant words. It is really an honor and a pleasure to be your friend and to have you on our program. I'd like to encourage everybody to support the work of the Brandeis Center. You could go to their website at brandeis.com, right? Brandeis Center.com.
BrandeisCenter.com.
BrandeisCenter.com.
And if you need to reach me, emails at info@brandeiscenter.com will also.
Right. There were many questions that came in, and there are many individual students and professors that have been subjected to anti-Semitism around the country that I know would love to reach you. That's why I would love people to support the Brandeis Center, because, you know, as I said, we have got to clone you. There should be thousands of Alyza Lewins around the country. And what your work is so unbelievably important, because I think, as has always been the case, the Jews are the canary in the coal mine. And I think what's going on against Jews throughout our nation's college campuses are just an indication of some kind of corrosive rot within our society, you know. And you just quoted Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and he had said, of course, you know, what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. So I encourage everybody to please support the Brandeis Center. Also, please think about Met in your end of year giving, because we also very much need your money to be able to put on programs such as this and to do our normal work on Capitol Hill every week, fighting for the Jewish people in the state of Israel. Anyway, thank you very much. And as my board likes me to say, please look us up as well at Met on www.ametonline.org. And thanks again, Alyza, for all your wonderful work.
Thank you.